Okay. Hello and welcome to the Gerontological Society of America's career conversation, Making the Most of Your Postdoc. I'm Dr. Eva Maria Trinkhaus, a postdoctoral researcher with the Center for Interdisciplinary Research on Aging and Care at the University of Graz in Austria. Before we begin today's program, I would like to provide a few logistical considerations. Please keep your audio on mute during the event and submit your questions for the panelists through the Zoom chat. We invite you to view the event in Zoom speaker view. This career conversation is being recorded and will be available after the event on the GSA's website. I'm joined today by my co-moderators, Dr. Tina Sadarandani, an assistant professor at New York University, Dr. Lei Chen, who is a doctoral candidate at the University of California, Los Angeles, and Dr. Patty Sladham, the visiting scholar at the GSA. Tina, Patty, Lei, and I are all members of the GSA Career Conversations work group that plans the career conversations. And in case you're not familiar with what that is, GSA's Career Conversations provides a forum for an exchange of ideas about issues and strategies to build a successful career in gerontology. So with this said, let me briefly introduce you to today's topic. Are you contemplating postdoctoral training, or have you decided to do a postdoc but feel like you have no idea what to expect? During this session, our panelists from a range of disciplines will share their insights and perspectives on how to maximize your postdoc experience to jumpstart your career. We encourage questions from the audience, so please feel free to share your questions in the chat. To open today's career conversation, I would now like to introduce our panelists. We're delighted to have a distinguished group of GSA members with us to share their perspectives on making the most of your postdoc experience. First, we welcome Dr. Ola Kribenak, the director and founder of the Center for Interdisciplinary Research on Aging and Care at the University of Graz in Austria. Dr. Kribenak is a professor of aging studies and has a long history of successfully mentoring doctoral candidates and postdocs in aging studies and other fields. Next, we would like to welcome Dr. Kamal Patel Murali, who is a T32 postdoctoral research fellow at the Columbia University School of Nursing. Dr. Murali will share insights and perspectives on being a postdoc and give us some guidance for our own research trajectories. We're also pleased to have Dr. Christine Ponder, the Senior Director of Research Affairs in the Office of the Vice Provost for Research at New York University, joining us today. And we're delighted to have Dr. Ponder here as an expert who will provide us with valuable insights into the topic from her perspective. I'm now giving the mic and screen to Dr. Tina Sadarandani, who will lead the panel discussion. Tina.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be joining all of you today. And again, a special thank you to all of our panelists. Each of our panelists have diverse career journeys and expertise in gerontology and postdoctoral training. So I know our audience all look forward to learning from each of you in today's conversation. And so with that, I will go ahead and just start with some of our questions, but again, encourage our audience members to put their questions in the chat. So to begin, this to our faculty members, Dr. Kribenak, to Dr. Ponder, why don't you both start by, either of you can begin by telling me what you view as the purpose of a postdoc?
So I think this is a good question to ask yourself as you're contemplating going into a postdoc. What is your purpose in being a postdoc? Because up until in training, it can feel like you're just taking the next logical step. You want to get a PhD, so you go to school and you're getting your degree. And I think the postdoc is really a time where you should be assessing what you want out of that position, because you don't have to do it, right? Like it's one of the steps where you can make different choices. And so if you are planning to continue in an academic career, a postdoc can be really useful and necessary, I would say. And so in one case, that's the purpose of a postdoc. It is to continue your academic career and get whatever credentials you need during that time to move on to that faculty position or whatever your next position that you have in mind. It can also be a place to gain skills and gain experience that your graduate training did not provide. So it can be a place to pivot And even if you don't end up continuing in an academic career, it can be a place where you've learned additional skills, you've gotten additional experiences that you can then translate into whatever the rest of your career is. But it's not a place, it's not a job. I would hesitate to think about it that way, because it's just not well paid enough to be a good job, right? Like, you need to be getting something out of it besides the money. So that's my introduction.
Fair enough. That is all. Those of us who've done postdocs, I think we would all agree with you on that, Dr. Ponder. Dr. Kribernig, what about you? What do you think is the purpose?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think I'll provide a little bit of an international background to this, but also I have a couple of questions on postdocs in the USA, because I'm really interested in how this is seen. It's kind of a unique career trajectory that we don't have in the same sense in Europe, although we use the same words. You know, sometimes there are these false friends where things don't translate as we think they should or could. So in our case, it's an absolutely necessary career step. Actually, without a postdoc, you won't get on. You have to do that in a way in order to then apply for a faculty position, because the PhD in itself, of course, doesn't grant you the faculty position. In Austria, in the German-speaking countries, for instance, in Germany, Switzerland, but also in Romania and Spain, you have to do another kind of it's kind of a PhD again. It's another qualification thing that you have to do. And that's what you do during a postdoc usually. You write your habilitation, as it's called. So it's another book project. And so that's something you need to do anyway. But in general, the purpose of a postdoc, I totally agree with what you said, Christine. And I don't think there is much else to say there, except perhaps the networking opportunities that you have to establish. And you have the opportunity also to make yourself known to the field, and maybe even to shape the field with others, especially, for instance, in our context, the field of aging studies, which is fledgling in a way in this kind of cultural gerontological sense in Europe. So Eva, who's a postdoc at our center, Eva Maria Trinkers, is also there to shape that field in the European context. And that's, of course, something very, very valuable. And we couldn't do that without having Eva, for instance.
I agree. I think that's great. And I love, the fact that you bring us the international perspective, because yes, there's the requirement and the function is quite different, but that at the end of the day, the goal, there's many parallel universal goals of a postdoc. And so, Komal, I want to ask you, when you were starting your postdoc, what did you view as why did you choose to do a postdoc? And then I will follow up with that by having you tell us a little bit about what a day in your life is like at the moment. But,
sure.
Tell us a little bit about why you elected to do one in your field.
Absolutely. So for me, it was pretty clear in my mind early on that I wanted to have an academic career. So I knew that a postdoc was just a natural progression after I completed my PhD. And so when I was looking for postdoc programs, I was really thinking about the gaps in my training that I needed to fill, that I hadn't been able to sort of fill during my time as a PhD student. And so I think this idea of what is the purpose of a postdoc, I agree with Christine that it is very self-driven. You do decide what your purpose is, but ultimately it also is going to be driven by the institution where you land and the mentors that you have. So I think it's sort of a collaborative purpose determination, if you will. And so for me, again, it comes back to training gaps that I had. I wanted to focus on having some big data science experience. And so I chose a postdoc where I could go and have that experience. And I was also trying to figure out how to narrow down my research focus so that I knew what I'd be sort of focusing on, yes, as an early career faculty member, but also in my early grants. And so I did a lot of work to sort of better understand the population that I was interested in, and also try to do work in palliative care and aging that sort of built upon my work that I did as a PhD student. And finally, for me, it was also about networking and collaborating, which I will say has been a bit challenging in the pandemic, not having a lot of the in-person experiences that many early career individuals and postdocs have had. But I've really learned how to sort of get the most out of social media, email, Zoom, and doing the best I can to really just reaching out to researchers, faculty members, and potential mentors at various institutions, and also within my own institution to really get the training and experience that I've been looking for.
I actually love that element of the answer is also about how it enhances your grantsmanship, particularly here in the US, because it is so critical and so important to get real solid footing on in terms of what you want to do, get your idea, enhance your ideas and make them more concrete. So I think that's an important addition as far as a period in time of thinking. Tell us a little bit, Komal, since you have the lived experience at the moment while we're talking and chatting with you, about what a typical day as a postdoc fellow looks like for you at Columbia.
Sure. So I would say that, so I don't have a typical day, but I have a typical week. And so my week is sort of structured around the days on which I have research team meetings. And because I work for such a sort of big center and have 3 different mentors with multiple R01s, I have to attend multiple research meetings throughout the week. And so I know Mondays and Thursdays are pretty much my meeting days for my institution. And so I structured those days around those meeting days. But the other days in the week where I have a little bit more sort of say over my time, I really try to have protected time for writing, and for whether it's writing or reviewing or working on my research. And so in the morning, what I'll do is, since I'm the brightest and the clearest in my mind in the morning, I'll try to block out time to get some writing done. And then I save meetings for the afternoon. And ultimately, every day will change depending on what's happening and what I'm trying to sort of get done. But again, each day is sort of structured around meeting times. And I really have learned this skill as a postdoc, where you do need to block out time for yourself so that you're making sure you're remaining productive and getting sort of meeting your goals and getting your work out there as well.
So I actually think you bring up a really good segue to one of the I think happens to be a controversial question. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I would love if Dr. Krieger and Dr. Ponder could opine on this. One of and I think it's discipline specific, but there seems to be some question around how much of your postdoc is truly me time, meaning how much of a postdoc is meant to be spent advancing your own research, your own program of research and your own development, versus how much of this is meant to be a mentored experience where you are helping someone else advance their own research and, in theory, then learning and benefiting from that experience by learning. So we seem to see that there's some people who, and I say this from my own experience when I was thinking about a postdoc, some people who said, nope, it was my time to think freely, to fill the gaps I needed to fill, to work on the projects I needed to get done, write those dissertation papers and get them out. And then there were other people who said, no, I was really focused on learning from this mentor, on helping them advance their study, being co-author on their papers. So I'm curious what both of you have to say about that. And maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Krieger, because I don't know if in Europe it's different.
Thanks. That's a great question, actually, and it's not so easy to answer, because I think eventually we all work with postdocs the way we were trained, and it takes a lot of reflection not to do this and fall into the same traps. I was lucky enough to have a really, really generous mentor who opened up her networks for me, who helped me grow, who let me do my own publications and mistakes. She did actually have a say in a couple of publications and had her name put there, where I thought, okay, yeah, fair enough. She helped me get into this journal or so, but she was really great, and I'm trying to do the same. At the same time, the pressure of the university of writing more grants, getting more research money in, and so on is so huge that sometimes I need to actually resort to my postdocs and say, hey, please help me write a grant or come up with your own idea. I'll support you with this. So, and in our system, they're also called assistants. They're called university assistants. So the term itself, in a way, suggests that they are assistants to the chair or to the professor. And I don't want to see it as that, but sometimes you need this assistant for the whole center or for the whole department to strive. And I think it's also a learning experience, but we all need to be really aware of the fact that postdocs, it's so competitive and they need this me time, and we have to carve some niches for them to also have it. And you need to be really structured to get that. Otherwise, a mentor could easily just eat you alive and you don't have anything. And it's important to sort of build boundaries for yourself. I think that's really important. But in our system, and that's perhaps different than other, like the American or German system even, you can stay on after your PhD. And that might sound great for a couple more years, but it also comes with pitfalls. in my case, for instance, I did my PhD at the same university, stayed on. I had the possibility then of having a 10-year track postdoc position, and that was great. But at the same time, my mentor then suddenly realized, hey, wait a minute, she's growing very quickly and she's getting a bit big, and not only literally because I gained like 20 kilos of weight. That's also an advice on the side as a footnote. Find some kind of sports that you love. But anyway, my mentor then suddenly realized that I was getting more and more successful. I had good networks. I profited from the opportunities she had given me, and I made good use of them. And then I started getting invited for keynotes, for instance, and suddenly we were on the same level. I also became an associate professor just as her. And that was really difficult. And eventually we had to split up. And there was a lot of conflict and lots of money also for good counseling and so on. And that's the pitfalls of our system. And so I think sometimes, even though you think it might be great to stay on in a city where you've built a family, or you've got a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, partner, children, it can also be difficult to keep working with the same professors that have mentored you. So I think mobility and being flexible enough to move is something that's really, really important.
Yeah, those were excellent points. I agree. I mean, I think it's one of those yes and situations. I think you end up doing both things as a postdoc. And I come from genetics was my field. And then for the past decade, I've worked in administration. So I don't supervise one postdoc. I supervise all the postdocs at NYU. So my relationship to the role is somewhat different. But for postdocs in many fields, you're hired on a specific grant. Like a faculty member can bring you on to help work on something specific. And so in that case, you do have to do that specific work. You know, you have to make progress towards those goals, whatever the grant is. But again, that's the part where you want to be thoughtful about what you're getting out of it, like what you're doing there. If all you're doing is producing data for a grant of someone else's grant, like perhaps you're not getting enough out of that experience. And you do need to carve out time and space for your own ideas and developing them, especially as you move along in your postdoc. Maybe not in the first couple months you're there, that might not be what you're doing, but it should be one of the goals overall of being in your postdoc. And that's one of those times, and I appreciate you bringing up the relationship with your former mentor, your graduate mentor, because I think that's part of it, like having these really sort of difficult sometimes, but explicit conversations about what you own and what you are co-authors on. Having those, bringing that stuff out into the open is really the only way to do it. And it can be dicey, you know, it can be a difficult conversation to have with a mentor, but it's important in terms of your individual growth, because that's what you're there for. You're there to build your own career while contributing to some of the research that's happening in whatever lab group you're part of.
I think that actually speaks to Dr. Morelli's point about grantsmanship. You know, at some point, you're going to have to write something on your own. So what data are you going to have that comes out of this that supports whatever idea that you're going to put forward? So I think that's an extremely valuable point. And can you just provide, Dr. Ponder, because I happen to know from personal experience, you were excellent at your job. What recommendations do you have in terms of like those negotiations when somebody starts their postdoc and they're sitting down with their mentor? How can they clearly say, you know, I need to get this out of this experience, and make sure that they do that? What advice do you have for setting up a mentorship plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I really appreciate that. So thinking about, I mean, hopefully we work on the mentor side too. And I would want you to be in a situation where you go into with a mentor who asks you those questions, like, what do you want for your career? What is your next step? But if they don't, it is perfectly reasonable and, you know, I think the right move for you as the postdoc to bring it up and to say, okay, here is my plan for this postdoc. I realize that we have, so there may be limits that you can talk about if there's funding, right? Like maybe you have 2 years of funding or 3 years of funding. You can go in and say, I realize that we have funding for this amount of time. Here's what I think that we can get done in this amount of time. What do you think? And at the end of that, I would like to be able to write this grant, or I would like to be able to move on to this position, you know, having some idea. And it's not that I feel like people struggle with that kind of planning sometimes because you don't actually know the future and what's going to happen, but being thoughtful about what you would want to happen is the way to get there. And things may come up and things may change, but at least if you have started having those conversations, there's a place for them to evolve from, right? You start with, here is this plan, and probably that plan will change over time, especially if it's a longer three or more year postdoc. Those plans can change, but at least if you have a starting point and you've expressed where your goals are and where you're trying to go, it opens up a conversation, and hopefully most mentors are there for that, kind of developing you, because that's the other thing to think about as a trainee, that your mentor, their career is also built on your success, right? Like you as a trainee, the things that you can accomplish, then when your mentor has to write their next grant and write about the people that they previously trained, your successes become their successes in that way. So in the best cases, they are building you up to succeed, and it helps them grow also.
For Dr. Kriepeneck and for Dr. Morali, I am curious if you have any tips on managing potential conflict with your mentor, just some general advice that comes up in events of moments of perhaps disagreement, or where perhaps you feel like their vision is not aligning with your vision, or you feel perhaps there's that balance of doing their work versus your work does not exist. What kinds of tips do you have for our audience members about maintaining those relationships and managing conflict? We can start with you, Dr. Kriepeneck, if you want.
I think that's also where my pearl of wisdom perhaps comes in already, and that was clarity, honesty, and compassion. And I think these three taken together are good in order to be a good team member, but also for good conversations with mentors or with conflict. It doesn't only mean to be clear towards others, but also to yourself. And I'm not very good at that sometimes, and that's why I know it's important to have. So I think this conversations usually always help, and you need to be open and frank and honest and not scared. And I think sometimes postdocs or doctoral students even feel like I'm only the small part here and I'm not important enough yet. But yes, you are. And without postdocs, professors wouldn't be able to strive. Yeah? So I think a lot more self-confidence in such conversations would be good sometimes. And I'm speaking here from a German-speaking, quite hierarchical system. And there is sometimes not even a first name basis, that's sometimes the case. So it's very difficult, and it's part of this whole university hierarchy, that it's a very hierarchical system in our case. So I think enough self-confidence, but also honesty and compassion is good for all these conversations. And I think you need, during a postdoc especially, you need good friends, honest friends that you can sort of let the hair down with, people that you trust, people that you love, and that support you for such conversations. Maybe even rehearse them, but you need to have them sometimes.
Dr. Morali, what about you?
Yeah, so I think some of this also comes down to the goal setting and sort of being thoughtful about the way in which you're trying to achieve those goals, and being really open and honest with your mentor about what's sort of feasible and achievable within a given time frame. And I think setting expectations is really important, but also being mindful that we can have the best intentions in the world and have expectations for ourselves, and our mentors will have expectations of us. And sometimes things don't always sort of pan out the way they want them to, or the way we want them to. And that's when you sort of have to say, I had this goal, it didn't work out. Let's have a conversation about why this isn't working out. And sometimes a little bit of the conflict, at least from my experience, has come from not being able to sort of meet certain goals or milestones or whatever you want to call them in a time frame that sort of had already been stated. And then having that conversation saying, I'm really sorry, like I couldn't get this grant done or this portion of the grant done for this date, but these are the reasons why. And this is what I'm working on to sort of, overcome that. And I've been fortunate enough to have really generous and understanding mentors who hold me to sort of a high standard, but also understand that when things don't go as planned, that it's okay. And I think just having open conversations, but also being thoughtful about being goal setting, document those conversations for yourself. And Also, your institution or your program might have forms or sort of documents that you need to fill out. For example, in my T32 program, I have specific NIH criteria that I have to meet for this particular T32 program, but then Columbia Nursing also has specific objectives for postdocs that need to be met within a 2-year period. And so having all of these documents sort of filled out and have honest, open conversations with your mentors on a regular basis about what's being accomplished, I think really helps. And then when conflict arises, just be open, bring it up, and have a conversation.
Right. And I think if your institution doesn't have those specific resources, we can certainly provide links to them, and it may be discipline specific and mentor specific. I see Dr. Ponder nodding her head but I think that's important to have some kind of baseline criteria, because the postdocs, I think, can be, based on what you're all saying, very fluid, very different. Some needs are different on one day to the next, but having firm criteria that both you and your mentor have to be held to, I think are really fundamental to this experience. I want to just go off script briefly because Dr. Kriebernegg mentioned, doing your postdoc in a place where, perhaps you have family in some place and you decide to stay in a place. And Dr. Morali, I happen to know you have a young family, but then Dr. Ponder said, well, this isn't a job, don't think of this as a job. So I guess my question is, for people in our audience who may be balancing work and family responsibilities, do any of you have any pearls of wisdom about how to balance those commitments during a postdoc? I mean, I imagine they're very similar to other phases in your career, but perhaps there's something unique during that period that we have to think about as well. So Dr. Morali, go ahead.
Sure. Honestly, this has sort of been the most challenging aspect of my postdoc. It's not my research, so to speak. It's just managing the expectations of my personal life, being a mother of two young children, and having a partner who's also sort of, having a busy career. So I think for me, it's been the biggest learning experience during this time has been learning how to better structure my time. Because I know that it's a fixed time period for me, and on any given day that I could really give my undivided attention to my work. And so during regular business hours, when I have childcare, is when I can work. And then I sort of make up for that when I need to in the evenings and on the weekends. And I know it's a little taboo to say, oh, you shouldn't be working at night and you shouldn't be working on the weekends. But I think ultimately it's individual specific, and you have to do what works for you and your life and your family. And so be thoughtful about that, and be kind to yourself. It's okay if you can't work till 8 p.m. every day because you have to stop at 5:30 to pick up your kids from daycare or whatever it is. And so I think just being thoughtful about your time, how you structure it, and communicate that with your collaborators and your mentors. That was, I would say, in the beginning of my postdoc, having sort of being in New York City, starting in May, finishing my PhD in April 2020, and then starting my postdoc in July 2020 when I didn't have childcare during lockdown. That was sort of the biggest challenge for me. And it required a little bit of, I would say, creative expectation setting for my mentors.
Yeah, I think in terms of work hours and that kind of thing, we're in a whole new world. And so I don't know if I can tell you what it's going to be like in the near future, because it's not like it has been in the past. I have school age children, and a lot of the expectation around that is I can work at 3 o'clock. I take a break from working and do a school pickup and do some other things, and then come back to my work later in the day. And so it's actually that sort of flexibility. It's not that I'm working fewer hours. It's just I've rearranged them a little bit in my day to meet those kind of familial obligations, which I'm really grateful to be able to meet. It's great that we have this additional flexibility. But that's sort of your work-life balance in the day. But there's also the geography, right? In an academic career, a lot of people do move around, and I don't have a great solution for that. Some of what I didn't say it, but my two co-panelists both brought up networks, and I think that is absolutely true. It's one of the things you're really doing in a postdoc is expanding your network of people that you know. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to go to a different institution, go to a new place, and meet new people. And it's almost I feel like you sort of have to do that, but maybe not. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that one. So I will let somebody else speak about it.
Well, I do appreciate you saying that because, we have many of us, we're told in our PhD programs that it's career suicide to stay at the same institution that you did your pre-doctoral work at as a postdoc. I'm just curious quickly if anybody has any comments on that. I certainly do, but I'm curious if our more experienced panelists have thoughts on whether is it if that's the only option that somebody has, is that bad? Is that a bad thing?
I don't think it's career suicide. Like, I think it's absolutely possible to do what you need to do, but it's harder, I think, if you stay at the same institution. It's harder to break out of the role of student if the people around you have known you as a student. It's just a bigger challenge. I mean, and I think we're lucky, you and I, Tina, are lucky to live in New York City, where there's a lot of institutions around. And so I think you could build a career in New York City by going from Columbia to NYU to Cornell and still be in the same place, but not all geography locations are like that. So
I agree. I think I was a PhD student at NYU, and so having left to go to Columbia, I also live in New York City, but I think that change has been really good for me, and just seeing how another institution sort of does research in general has been really eye-opening as well. Also, I will say that even if you don't leave your institution, I think now, and maybe this is just my experience, but I've also heard this from a lot of my sort of co-postdocs as well, is that a lot of institutions are offering remote training opportunities. And so that might sort of, I think, help with this issue of having that sort of institutional academic diversity that people are looking for. One of the postdocs that I was considering was a remote postdoc where they were not requiring me to move, but it was in Utah. So I think for those of you who are not sort of geographically flexible or mobile, there are remote options, I think, that are really worth considering.
Tina, we have a question from the audience that fits in with what we're talking about right now, which is this balance between the needs of postdocs and the institution or the advisor. And the question from Kira is, if you're in a postdoc position that's maybe intended to be a multi-year commitment, and you have an opportunity for the position that you were looking for, a faculty role or whatever, before this time is actually up, what is this commitment you're making when you join a postdoc, and how flexible is it, or what do you need to think about in whether you could leave that commitment earlier maybe than you thought because of the job that opens up? And I don't know if just what you should be thinking about in negotiating that, because it's another tough thing to negotiate. I've had my own, postdocs run into this situation where, wait a minute, I'm in the training role, but boy, my ideal job is here, and it's here for me. Should I really stick out another 6 months over here and risk losing this over here, right? I mean, this is what they're asking. So what are your thoughts for Kira here?
Yeah, my personal bias is absolutely not. You should go for that permanent job. But then you want to be as gracious as you possibly can, right? Like, I would be talking that through with my with my postdoc advisor about, like, this is a great opportunity. How can I transition things? You want to be really open with people, like many of us have said. But that's why you're in the postdoc, is to get that final job or get that next job. And if I would always invite people to take it, when offered. If it's your ideal job, like, I don't even know why we would talk about it. Of course you would want to go on to do that, but maybe other people have different opinions.
Dr. Kriebernay, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there again, I think clarity and openness is really important. And I can't think, if your mentor really doesn't understand that, it's probably time to go anyway. If this perfect opportunity opens up for you, how many tenure track jobs or permanent jobs are there out there? So I think usually it's a good thing to jump at the opportunity. Of course, it depends on the context, and there might be situations where it's not a good idea, or where you really offend your mentor because it's the greatest sort of enemy of that person or whatever. Yeah. So there might be issues, but I think if it's your dream job and it's opening up there. A mentor usually understands that, or they should at least, if you explain, and I think you can make your point very clear there. But just one more thing about the parenthood thing that I was thinking of. I did sort of a postdoc, or I spent some time in Arizona, which is 9 hours away from Austria. And the way I solved it was that every night at bedtime, I would get a book that my daughter had picked and I would read a chapter to her. So I had to leave the library and I went out into the shade somewhere and I read one chapter, and she knew that when it was 7 o'clock her time, I would be out there reading to her, and my husband took great care of her and enabled me to go. And I appreciate that flexibility, but it is possible. And that's one of the questions I usually get, because I do a lot of postdoc mentoring, international postdoc mentoring. And interestingly now, there seems to be a conservative backlash in Europe, because I get these questions always from women, lots of women. And that is, in a way, that's quite interesting, actually, that women again start thinking about that more than men. That's sometimes alarming for me also. And I'm wondering what's happening there. But it seems to me that this is a really important question, and I encourage people to still do it, and family will hopefully be able, your family will be able to work it out. It's a tough ride. It is a tough ride. And we all work sometimes till 2 or 3 in the morning, even though we probably shouldn't say that, and it's not normal, but that's, I think, the way we do it. I just had to say that. Sorry.
Patty, thank you for also interjecting. If there are other questions in the chat, we encourage all of you to ask away, and please let me know if there are any. The question that I think is important for each of you is, what do you wish you had known? So if we have people in our audience who are going to start a postdoc, let's say in September, what do you wish you had known before you started your postdoc? So Komal, maybe this is the most relevant for you right now, but I would like to hear from everybody. So why don't we start with you? Before you started, what do you wish you had known?
I think the postdoc experience was not at all what I was expecting in many ways, because I think I wasn't prepared for how many responsibilities I would have as a postdoc, and sort of all the directions that I would be pulled in during this time. And so, I was very clear about my goals, and I had very specific training objectives that I had to meet for my T32 grant. But I also didn't realize that I'd have a lot of leadership sort of responsibilities within my institution, but also be expected to have leadership responsibilities outside of my institution. And so some of that comes down to me saying yes a lot, but then also wanting to do a lot of these sort of service and leadership things. And so I think the time piece was the most unexpected for me. Just having to sort of budget out my time for these various priorities has been unexpectedly difficult, but really good learning experience, I would say. And then the second thing for me was, because I struggle with this, was that I wish I had learned a better way of saying no and being comfortable with that no. And I know we talk about this a lot in academia or in general, but I still struggle with it, but I'm getting better at sort of finding my voice and saying, thank you for the opportunity. I don't think this is going to sort of be an appropriate sort of use of my time right now, but I'd be happy to consider this in the future. And thinking about it that way has been my biggest sort of unexpected struggle.
What do others think about what you wish you had known, or what you think everyone should know before they go into this?
Well, I often end up talking to postdocs about like how to evaluate an opportunity with the most information that you can. And this is a place where where you are, the environment that you're in as a postdoc is so important. Like, it's really, are you going to get the training that you need? Are you going to get the support that you need? Are you going to have good relationships? And that's all kind of hard to figure out. It's not always clear on paper. And so having those conversations with people that are working there now and being able to read between the lines of what people say. I was just talking about this to someone the other day where, somebody might say like, oh, here we have a lot of independence. And that means that like, nobody's ever going to check in on you. Or like, we have a lot of, figuring out if somebody's like a micromanager because they're always in your business, or, those conversations are really hard, and it's like a detective story, like trying to figure out what's going on in this place and if that's going to be a good place for you. So talking to as many people as you can around a situation, and trying to read between the lines of what people are saying about a particular environment can be important. Yeah, I did a post, it was so long ago when I was evaluating my own postdoc experience, it's hard to remember.
I do think you bring up a good point that so much of what I think everyone's alluding to is you have to be super self-directed in this role, right? You have to learn time management. This isn't like your PhD where you're singularly focused on this one project that you're working on that matters to you and that will get you. This is now you start to see the introduction of other responsibilities within a postdoc. And so, I actually would ask all of you, what other responsibilities are relevant to a postdoc? Komal just talked about service and leadership. Like, how much of this is meant to be time to work on your own papers, and how much of this should you be doing things for your institution and you're mentoring other people, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious if either you, Dr. Gruberneck or Dr. Ponder, have thoughts on that.
I don't know. I mean, there are many of those other experiences are a really important part of the training that you're getting as a postdoc, right? Like if you have the opportunity to mentor graduate students or that's part of what you need to be learning as a postdoc, is how to mentor and how to help develop careers of people that are younger than you or behind you in their training. But yeah, I think saying no is a skill that we all need, right? so being able to balance that, like which opportunities really are going to provide you with growth and in terms of the things that you actually experience, but also what you put on your application for the next opportunity kind of thing. What makes you a better candidate for the next job that you really want. I don't know, like somebody else jump in.
Well, I think what I would have liked to know before is how much of a role model you are actually as a postdoc for others, for junior scholars. But one of the things I think one could do is, and I'm not sure this fits now with the question, but perhaps it does. For instance, with the gerontologist, I'm an associate editor now of the gerontologist, and I always see that many reviewers do not use the opportunity of having assistant reviewers come in. So as a postdoc or a later pre-doc, for instance, you can sign up to be a reviewer as well, or an assistant, or help a professor, help a reviewer or somebody else. Doing that, also signing up to be a reviewer on a grant proposals. I think that brings you a lot of experience also. And I wish I had known that before. I wish I had known that I could sign up to for grant proposals, because then you get, 10 or 20 to review, and you learn so much from that. That's one of the opportunities I probably missed and I would have liked to have.
Yeah, it's funny, I feel like the line of questioning today has been a lot on like research and your research output and what you're supposed to be working on. But this sort of direction it seems that universally, whether you're in Europe or here, this is part of your training to become a faculty member. And when you are a faculty member, it's hard to think forward to that when you're still in your postdoc role. And I feel like for those people who do, 1 to 2 year postdocs, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, year 1 is really coming out of that training role. Year 2, towards the end of that role, you should really feel more like a faculty member than a trainee in terms of your command of your field and your ability to juggle these responsibilities. I'm just curious, I think all of us would benefit from this. Any tips on time management? How to manage your time most effectively, given all the responsibilities you face?
I can start on that one, because I think for me, that's been one of the biggest learning experiences. I really came into the postdoc not having sort of a system that works for me. And so I had to develop that system. And some of that came down to really trying to be mindful about where sort of my responsibilities were going to require the most time, focus and energy. And so I try to prioritize my research first and try to be thoughtful about time during the day that needs to be spent on making sure that I'm meeting my writing goals and that I'm staying on top of my responsibilities to the research teams that I work with. And speaking to that a little bit more, the work that I do on these research teams, a lot of it is supposed to be sort of helping me advance my program of research. So I say yes to the projects that actually help me move forward in my own research and that will inform my grants that I'm writing coming up. And so being thoughtful about time when it comes to that has been the biggest learning experience for me. And then all the other time that's left over, I commit to my service, leadership, mentoring, and I've done a little bit of teaching, those responsibilities. But I make sure that if I don't have enough time for my research and making sure that my papers are getting written and my grants are getting written, that the other sort of things that I say yes to, I'm being really careful with those decisions. And then just I'm a calendar addicted person. So I try to schedule out every hour, sometimes every half hour of my day, so that I know that things are getting done in a timely manner.
Well, that sounds great, Molly, and I think this is so valuable, and I wish I could do that too in that same manner. Eventually, we have to learn to balance our time unless you want to run into a burnout. You have to say no to things and get better at that. There's this metaphor of the glass, and I think the way you're doing it is almost like this metaphor. You have a glass and you have stones, you have gravel, and you have sand. And the stones are your big research proposals, for instance, or the things that are really important and take longer. So what do you put in first into that glass to fit the most? If you fill it with sand, you'll never be able to squeeze in the stones, right? So of course you'd put in the stones first, the big ones, the rocks, and then the gravel, and then perhaps the sand. And I think that helps a little bit in balancing my calendar also and filling in stuff where I think, okay, hey, wait a minute, I need to block out 2 days. And that's what I now do. Sometimes, Eva, I'm sorry to tell you this, you should know as my office mate, but I sometimes make up appointments because my team members can see my calendar. And, you know, sometimes if I don't teach, I actually don't make them up, but I don't delete them if they get canceled. So I leave them in also for myself. So I'm lying to myself in a way, seeing that there is an appointment and then I know I can use that extra time. And that helps me. I'm not actually making them up, but not deleting them already helps. Yeah.
Patty,
Yeah, I do a similar thing where I put like work tasks on my calendar, even though like it's something I can do whenever I need to. It's a thing that I need to get done that week. I put it, you know, I block off 2 hours on my calendar to work on that thing. And that way nobody can schedule me for a meeting, because also my calendar is visible to my colleagues who can find me in my time. It's hard. It's a difficult challenge.
Patty, are there other questions in the chat before we go on? Because I
just want to add one more point to that. I think it's important also to be kind to yourself, to know that even if you have the best intentions of getting things done in a certain time frame, you might require more time, and that's okay. And just being good to yourself. It's okay if something takes longer than you planned.
I just want to make sure we don't have any other questions.
Yeah, no, I think we're good right now, but please feel free to enter those questions. And Leigh, did you see any questions?
No.
Okay, and so we can talk about the international postdocs.
We do have one question in the chat. I see that are there any tips for international students to find a postdoc position? Yep. I assume the question is for international students to find postdoc positions in another country. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the question.
Yeah. Any tips?
So I'm not as familiar with the nursing field, or maybe some of the other fields that gerontology encompasses, but in, you know, sort of STEM in general, a lot of it is like networking. You know, you talk to your graduate advisor about, you know, collaborators and colleagues they have across the world. And, you know, if there's a particular country you're targeting, you could ask them about people in that area. And, you know, and going to professional meetings and talking to people. Largely, that is how you find postdocs that are funded by grants and that kind of thing. Other postdoc programs, I think, you have to know, you know, you do your research. You and Google can sit down in the afternoon and figure out which institutions are in the place that you're looking at and what programs they have available. But
well, and it is true that some training grants are going to be restricted to citizens, or you know, they're going to have an immigration something tied to them, right? But there are postdocs that are not tied to those sorts of restrictions, and the networking is a great way to find those. I think that was a good suggestion.
Also, writing grant proposals together sometimes helps. So we have a position available, for instance, for doctoral students. And the first thing I was thinking of, who were the ones joining us in grant proposals? Whom do I know already? And I'd ask colleagues, for instance, also, do you have anyone who might be qualified for this or that? So I agree, Christine, networking is really immensely important. And language skills too. And that's something that, not being a native speaker of English, as you can hear, of course, language is also important in our case. I mean, of course, our postdocs usually operate in German. So it's not easy to be an international student coming to Austria or Germany or Switzerland. But also when you evaluate postdoc proposals, language does count. And that's something that Europeans very often struggle with when they are not so fluent in English, that they are probably brilliant researchers, but the language skills don't actually then allow them to succeed.
Thank you. So I see Patty's about to put in some resources into the chat that all of you can benefit from, including individual development plans to hold mentors to. I do want to say that the other thing on saying no, just as a helpful point of wisdom, is that your mentor can also help you say no. So if somebody gives you a hard time about saying no, a good mentor will say, you know what, that's not the right responsibility for you right now. And so now with that, I want to thank again our panelists, and I want to hand it back over to Eva and say to bring our session to a close and get some final pearls.
Yeah, I have the great task to ask you all for your pearls of wisdom right now. And I'm starting with Dr. Krivenek, who's already mentioned a little bit about her pearl of wisdom. Dr. Krivenek, can you share with us what your pearl of wisdom is?
Yes, Dr. Trinkos, thank you. My pearl of wisdom is something that I've got on my office wall at home, and it's not academic, but it's clarity, honesty, and compassion, because these things would help you as an individual to stand yourself, but also to work with others. And eventually, it's not just your academic merits, it's also who you are as a person. And I really would add there kindness, perhaps kindness to yourself also. So I think these personal qualities, and I was thinking maybe it would be expected that I'd write something about, I don't know, postdoc experiences and some academic stuff where you always have to be at the right time at the right place or something. But I just thought I'd give it something very personal, because who you are as a person, be true to yourself, and be kind and honest and clear. That's, I think, a recipe that helps everyone succeed in life in general. That's what I find important, and that I try to stick to this.
Thank you very much. Dr. Morali, what is your pearl of wisdom? We would love to hear about that.
Absolutely. So I've been sort of talking about this in various ways throughout this session, but I think really being deliberate and intentional about your goals and your research objectives when you go into your postdoc. Be clear with yourself about it and make sure that your mentors know, but then also just have self-compassion, because things will likely not go as planned all the time. And I speak from experience. I had a K99 that was not discussed. And so, these things happen and it's okay. And you keep moving forward if this is the career you want. So self-compassion, I think, is really important.
Yeah, those are two really great pearls. There's a third one we're going to hear, Dr. Ponder. We're really curious about yours as well.
Well, so mine, I think I said this already, but like the postdoc is not well paid enough for it to be worth it on its own, right? You should be thinking about what you're getting out of it besides money. You should be getting skills, you should be getting networks, experiences, and to really be thinking about moving forward, because the other thing about a postdoc is it's a temporary position and you won't be in it for very long. So what's next? Like, how are you moving forward with that position?
Thank you all so much. As Tina has already said, Patty put some resources into the chat. And as we close our conversation today, we encourage our audience members to connect with mentors and peer colleagues before and during your postdoc experience, and also to just take advantage of resources and tools such as the individual development planning resources that Patty has posted in the chat. Again, thank you very much to our panelists for generously sharing your time, your career experiences, and all your perspectives with us today. And thank you also to our moderators and work group members who have planned this career conversation. Thanks to you, our participants, for your questions and comments and for spending your time with us today. And last but not least, also thank you so much, Gina, Schoen from the GSA for the behind the scenes coordination that really made this career conversation possible. Thank you, Gina, and thank you all. Just for your information, we will send out a brief survey following this event, just for you to provide feedback and help us in planning future career conversations, and also to just enhance the quality of those. Enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, and we hope to see you in one or more of our upcoming events.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.